Well, good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of August 19th, 2020. Before we call the meeting to order, I would just like to remind those watching that pursuant to Section 3 of the Declaration of Emergency Directive 006, there is no in-person attendance at this meeting. The only ones in the room are city staff and planning commissioners. The public may view the meeting on the website that you're probably already on if you can hear me, but it's the city's website and it's City Council meeting live stream. All right. So with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If we could all stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So as always, we open the meeting with general public comment, and I would remind listeners that public comment at this point of the meeting can cover the agenda item that's open for public comment. And if you have comments, please call in at 702-589-9629. And we'll pause for a few moments to see if anyone is going to call in. And then we'll also have some comments from the prior meeting read into the record in a few moments. And just to remind everyone, there is a 30-second delay, so the pauses are partially just to accommodate that and allow folks to react. We'll go a full minute, just a few more seconds. I would also like to remind the viewing audience that comments may also be submitted via the public comment form on the city's website. May also be submitted by email to cityclerk@bcnv.org. Or you could leave a voicemail at 702-293-9210. I think hearing no calls at this moment, I would look to the city clerk to read prior comments into the record, please.
And Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, the written comments or leaving a voicemail message is prior to the meeting?
Thank you.
And so I'm going to read then written comments that were submitted to the city clerk's office prior to the meeting. The first comment was submitted by Margaret Benson regarding agenda item Boulder Oaks Community. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to allow my comments. As a resident of Boulder City for over 10 years, I am proud of our little city. I care greatly about its preservation and safety. I want to focus on what I feel are important issues regarding this zoning amendment. I have a few concerns over this agenda item. 1, allowing wooden structures of any kind in an RV park on individual lots poses a fire danger. As RVs in nature are very flammable, it can take as little as 30 to 45 seconds for an entire RV to be engulfed in flames. When you have an RV park with lots of places very close together, any potential fire can cause a great deal of casualties in a little time. Knowing this park fairly well over the years, I have recently noticed so many new wooden structures being added onto various lots. The main concern I have is what happens if an RV fire occurs, catching any nearby wooden structures on fire and then spreading to multiple RVs. 2. From my recollection, there have been a few RV fires in this community in recent history. Had wooden structures existed on any of these lots, Boulder City could have a major catastrophe. Imagine if one of these large wooden structures caught fire. It could burn an entire street of RVs and more structures in minutes and kill innocent people. 3, my recommendations would be to allow for this new RV zone classification, but limit any structures to non-wooden materials such as vinyl, resin sheds, metal gazebos, etc. By eliminating the wood from structures, this greatly decreases the spread of fire and potential death. Thank you for your time. The next public comment was submitted by Gary Bryson regarding the same agenda item. Dear Planning Commission, my wife and I have been full-time residents of Boulder City Oaks RV Park for over 5 years. We own our lot and we pay individual property taxes yearly. During the time we have been here, we have seen a few of our friends leave and move to the Fee Simple Motor Coach RV Resort in Las Vegas. Their only reason for leaving was that they were not allowed to make the simple improvements we are asking for the permission to do. The large majority of our residents are permanent and senior citizens. We are a community of informed regular voters, particularly on local issues and elections. Furthermore, we make an effort to support the local businesses like restaurants, doctors, vets, repair services of all kinds. We recently adopted the local St. Jude's as a charity that we actively donate time, money, clothing, and food. Currently, our women's group is making handmade quilts and donating them to the residents, children, and young adults. We have our own post office, take care of all of our large trees and our paved streets. It is important to know that we are self-sufficient in many ways and are not a burden on the city's departments. Recognizing all of this, it is difficult to grasp why we are denied the right to make everyday quality of life improvements such as sheds for storage to keep our property neat, shade structures so we can enjoy the outdoors without suffering the sun damage. All of these items are things that other homeowners in the city enjoy. We can see no negative effect on the day-to-day life of anyone. One positive effect for the city will be the certain increase in property values and ensuring increase in property taxes enjoyed by the city. In these economic times, that is not easy to come by. Finally, there is also the pride effect of Boulder City being the home of possibly the finest RV park in the state and certainly the best in the nation at all at a time when RV vehicle sales business is bursting at the seams. Thank you for everyday time and effort in making the best town there is. We look forward to your positive recommendation on these issues. Gary and Virginia Bryson. The next public comment was submitted by Michael Doherty. And it says, hello, City Council members. I hope this message finds you all well. I am writing as a private property owner in the Boulder Oaks RV Resort as a show of support for rezoning our property from RVP to RVE, as they have in Las Vegas where a precedent has been set. Please consider strongly towards approving this rezoning due to our unique private property ownership. I feel strongly that the tradition of RV park zoning rules should not apply here as this is not a retail business for profit. In my opinion, the benefits to Boulder City would all be positive and I see no downside. After the beautiful renovation to the entrance of Boulder City, I envision our community as a complement to the long-term beautification of our city. If you have ever looked at the Las Vegas Motor Coach Resort, you might notice the sights are exceptional. Personally, I moved to Boulder City only due to the fact I could purchase this property and own it, putting me within an hour of my mother who needs me nearby. I was told there was a chance of rezoning and that I might be able to add a pergola and make improvements to make my lot as nice as possible. In effect, Boulder City businesses have gained as my money is being spent here locally. I was very excited there was an option outside of the public RV parks, not only for long stays, but to avoid the crime and issues that come with the public place. I drove into this property and thought it was spectacular in comparison to the public places, and I feel it lends well to Boulder City. The lots are so nice here due to being privately owned. I could keep going, however, since the changes are small, I am merely asking for your approval to make our property nicer as well as similar freedom as other property owners enjoy. I just received next year's property tax bills, and I hope you choose to allow us some of the rights most tax-paying property owners get to enjoy. I am sure you understand that when you own property, you want to make it nice. Some of the benefits I see are all below. 1, increased property values, which is better for owners in Boulder City. 2, increased long-term support of our local businesses through resident purchasing. 3, with the ability to improve our lots, the properties will only be nicer in step with the beautification projects the city just implemented and are still implementing. I am sure there are more benefits I am not listing, however, I believe you get the point, and I thank you for taking the time to consider my support. Best regards, Michael Doherty. The next public comment was submitted by Gary Jordahl. Boulder Oaks Community Association is a homeowners association that represents 277 owners of deeded lots within the resort. 275 of these own RV lots. In addition, the BOCA operates a clubhouse for the benefit of the owners. There are also privately an owned business office, a house located within the resort, which are not owned by the BOCA. For the past 25 years, BOCA and the owners have invested a considerable amount of money in these lots, which have been improved and beautifully landscaped. Putting these properties in the same category as the privately operated for-profit Canyon Trail RV next to the resort is very broad and overly simplistic categorization. The yearly property taxes of $47,659.46 paid by the profit Canyon Trail RV Park pales in comparison to the BOCA taxes paid by private owners, with the resort estimated to be approximately $112,196.04 per year. This number does not include the private property taxes collected either by the DMV or Clark County Tax Assessor's Office for our RVs, which can easily be double or triple the amount paid in real property taxes each year. A drive-through comparison of the RV park and RV resort quickly contrasts the extreme differences in property values. The only common factor is that recreational vehicles are parked in both. For a very large number of the owners in the BOCA community, this is our home and the pride of ownership shows. The reclassification would recognize the distinction. Property owners would benefit from the reclassification in the following ways. 1, property values will increase if we are no longer classified as a simple RV park. 2, owners will be able to better maintain the appearance of their properties with stronger, better constructed sheds. 3, the RV estate would eliminate the 180-day continuous occupancy limitation, which the city is not staffed to validate, given that 275 owners would have to be individually contacted and monitored by the city. 4, BOCA owners would have similar rights as other tax-paying property owners in Boulder City. The next written comment is from Sandy Peters. As a lot owner in Boulder Oaks, I feel that this rezoning will help to increase values in our community, assist us in protecting our assets and property by allowing us to build sheds and other structures. The sheds will allow us to keep our lots looking neat and tidy as we can place our yard items inside so they are not seen from the street. The HOA has come up with uniform colors and styles that will keep the park looking aesthetically pleasing as well. I am excited and pleased that the Planning Commission is considering this change and hope this zoning change is completed. Boulder Oaks is a beautiful place to live, and this will make it more so. The next comment was submitted by Jordan and Faye Weyerbach. It might be Weerbach. Hope I'm not messing the name up. As an owner and resident of Boulder Oaks for 5 years, we love this area and wish to do as much as possible to be good stewards of our property. We only want to be able, as owners of the land, to make improvements that not only increase value, but also quality of life in the desert. We urge you to support us in our appeal to the council. The next comment was submitted by Terry and Vicki West. As a current lot owner at Boulder Oaks, I believe the zoning should remain as it currently stands. NRS 116.41095, Part 2, states that prospective buyers need to understand and accept the declaration for the common interest property and not change it to their personal wants. We bought into a community for what it is, not what some would like it to be. Our current board is proceeding to make changes to our declaration and appears to label them as guidelines and/or rules. They have allowed park models, which our declaration does not allow. They have allowed wood sheds and other structures under their guidelines without explicit details and direction, which is against NRS 116.31065 rules. It states if rules are made, they must be explicit. And if there is conflict, the declaration prevails. They have allowed themselves to construct permanent shade shelters, which is against our declaration. They have moved forward building sheds and gazebos, etc., with apparent disregard to due process or current Boulder City zoning restrictions. A recent notification was sent to all owners from Boulder Oaks Association via email that clearly states if the zoning change is accepted, the lot owners would then be allowed to have such structures on their property. These structures already exist. Our postage stamp sized lots are not large enough to accommodate such structures and maintain correct setbacks and distances from neighboring properties. Fire hazard will increase to the point where the community will become dangerous to reside, and in our enjoyment of our property will be lost. The wood structures will burn. The furniture that the shade structures attract to the point the lot is cluttered will burn. The propane fire pits that are installed pose a huge threat to start and/or encourage fire, and its spread to the neighbors. The liability to encourage such actions need to be seriously considered, as well as the lack of enforcement to non-permitted structures. I encourage you to read the Boulder Oaks Association's architectural guidelines that reference acceptance of wood sheds, wood structure gazebos, metal gazebos, etc., and have them in writing before any change is even considered. Despite the current zoning and our declaration that forbids permanent structures, our board has allowed them continue to be built and labeled them as temporary structures. If Boulder City is limited growth city, how can the city allow an increase of that many lots without the proper planning for such zoning change? If the city allows this change, my concern is that some of it may be without a vote from its members. In addition, I am concerned that the board has made guidelines and or changes within our community which may be in conflict with either our declaration, city law, zoning, and or Nevada state law. Thank you for your time, Terry and Vicki West. And the final public written comment is from Julia Wood, and it states, I support this as I live here, and I feel it will make our property worth more and will also benefit the city when it comes to property taxes. It will also make Boulder City more attractive to people who live in their RVs to buy here. And all of these written comments I just read in will be included in the minutes.
Very good, thank you. At this time, I would ask whether there is anyone on the phone or provide a little bit of additional time for those who may have paused to call in. And remember, this is the initial public comment period, and there will be comment time available during the public hearing portion of agenda item 3, which is the Boulder Oaks item. Well, hearing none, I would close the initial public comment period and ask city staff, is there any other housekeeping items that should be brought up at this moment? All right. So going back to the agenda, the first item for action is approval of the minutes of the July 15th, 2020 regular Planning Commission meeting.
I'll move to approve. A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Steve. All right, next on the agenda is V-19-641, applicant David McMillan, relating to 1300 Gingerwood Street. And the item is approval of an extension of time for a variance, which was previously approved, as per section 11-35-8 of the city code.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got a couple new planning commissioners, but the rest of you will recall that last fall, the owner of the Gingerwood Mobile Home Park came to the city and needed a few different approvals in order to move forward with a small proposed expansion to the mobile home park. This is a mobile home park where all of the lots are rented. You know, people do not own their own lots in this park. One of the approvals last year was a variance request for certain reductions from the mobile home park zone standards for lot area, lot width, a standard for a wall, and the width of the landscape area along the park boundary. And the nature of that variance request is so that the new lots and new expansion would be consistent with what was already there for the rest of the park. There are some 270 lots in the park. I may have that number not quite right, but the expansion at the time last year was proposed for 7 new lots. There was going to be 1 new lot in the far northwest corner of the park, and then 6 new lots on this vacant parcel that is at the southeast corner of the property. Since the approval last September, the owner's engineer had been moving forward on the plans, but then they became aware that the fire department was going to make a change in determination regarding access to the park. Previously, they had been given the go-ahead so that there would not need to be a new entrance to Gingerwood Street, and that the 6 new lots at the southeast corner, that turnaround for emergency vehicles would be by what we call a hammerhead access. Since then, there's been a change of determination, and the owner will now be required to provide a new entrance out to Gingerwood Street from that new area at the southeast corner of the property. This actually results in the reduction of 1 lot from the project. So there will be a total of 6 new lots rather than 7. However, what's coming before the Planning Commission at this time is simply due to the fact that it's been more than 6 months that the variance was approved and a building permit was not obtained during that time. And technically, per the code, that means the variance expired, but the code states that extensions of time limits may be granted by the Planning Commission upon the showing of good faith and effort by the applicant to comply therewith, and failure to so comply by reason of conditions beyond the applicant's control. Part of the reason also for the delay in getting together with the fire department to hash these issues out was due to the COVID pandemic and limited access to staff at City Hall, especially with regard to the fire department being heavily involved in the pandemic matters for the community. So there's a statement attached from the applicant's representative who said he would also be available by phone. The variant staff report is included only for reference, especially for the new planning commissioners. But again, basically the request is the same as it was before. The only difference really is it's actually, 1 lot less than what was proposed before. But the issue is simply, has the applicant met the standards of showing good faith and effort and that the delay is beyond the applicant's control. And if the Planning Commission believes that standard has been met, you could pass a motion to do so.
All right. So normally at this point in time, we would have bring the applicant onto the phone. Why don't we do that just so we're consistent with our normal course of business?
That will get to him? Thank you. I thought he was on the other line. Oh, there he is. Hi, Sean, thank you for calling in.
Sean, I don't know if you were able to watch, anything online just now, but I just did a summary of the staff report, and I'm sure the commission would like to know if you've got any additional comments, and they might have questions.
I am streaming online, and you did a perfect job. I don't know if I could add anything more.
Any questions from the commission to the applicant?
Sean, I don't know if you were able to watch anything online just now, but I just did a summary of the staff report, and I'm sure the commission would like to know if you've got any additional comments or might ask any questions.
Mr. Fleming, can you put your phone on mute until you speak again, please?
Yes.
The delay.
All right, so Mr. Fleming, it sounds like we have no questions for you, but you're certainly welcome to remain on the line just to hear any thoughts that we have. So this is not a public hearing, so I would bring it back to the commission members for discussion and possible motion. And again, we're here to recommend or deny an extension to a variance.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I neglected to mention the information in the staff report. The request is for an extension of 180 days, which, if approved, would take the approval forward to February 15th, 2021.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. I had two staff questions, please. In terms of I noticed on the request, the person asking for the extension isn't the applicant from the first one. Is there any technical issues? It looks like Sean is asking for the extension, but the original applicant looked like staff members of SCA Design.
Automatically goes off, sorry. That's correct. In both cases, they were representatives of the owner.
Okay, so it doesn't matter. In terms of timing, when did the 180 days expire? Because I'm showing that it was approved, I believe I read it was approved in September, which would have meant that it expired in March.
That's correct, but that's when we were in the middle of COVID.
So the expiration date was actually a week or 2 weeks before things hit here with COVID. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the delay, it seems like the fire department issue was the biggest factor, which is out of their control. Do we know when they knew that there was an issue and concerns with the fire department?
Sean may be able to verify, but I think they heard around that time or earlier this year. We also had a transition in the fire department with a a new chief taking over. And that was part of the challenge of dealing with an interpretation or a determination by our prior fire chief, and then the transition in the fire department.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to approve, because it seems that, to me, that the applicant has acted in good faith, and there are a lot of extenuating circumstances, including the pandemic. So if there's no objection, I'd like to move that we approve V-19-641.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comment?
Just a question before we do a final thing. I know staff had some comments on doing a conditional approval with some findings and also specific conditions, of which should we not include those in the motion to approve? That's...
The extent, technically, just for a point of order, you're not approving the variance, you're approving the extension of the prior variance. So that will include all the conditions previously applicable. As I noted, the only difference is there's actually one less lot now than there was before.
Okay.
Do you have a good? Nope. Yeah, the only comment I would make is I kind of prefer, or I think the new design with an additional access point to the trailer park is a very positive move. And so anyway, with that, I would ask for a vote. All in favor of recommending approval of the time extension, please indicate.
Aye.
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 Anyone against? Thank you. The motion passes. Very good.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Mr. Fleming. Give me just a moment to catch up. Well, that's handy. Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 3 for possible action. AM-20-350, resolution number 1195, Boulder Oaks Community Association. This will include a public hearing and a recommendation to the City Council on a proposed amendment to Title 11, Chapter 8 of the City Code pertaining to RV or recreational vehicle zone to create 2 subzones for a new RVE or recreational vehicle estate zone in addition to an RVP or recreational vehicle park zone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start off by mentioning the thing that is understandably confusing for the public, including the residents of the park, relative to the comments that have already been read into the record, and also those additionally that are provided in the packet. And that is that what this process involves is a 2-step process. The ultimate goal is that the applicant is requesting that they be designated under a separate zone called recreational vehicle estate. However, before an actual rezoning could occur, the code actually has to allow that zoning district. So first, there's a text amendment, which is what's before you tonight as a recommendation to the City Council. So your recommendation will move forward to City Council. There will be another public hearing. If the City Council approves the zoning code amendment to create these 2 new subzones, then what will come back to the Planning Commission is an actual rezoning request to change the Boulder Oaks / Red Mountain RV Resort to the new recreational vehicle estate zone. So, as I said, it's perfectly understandable that residents will confuse this, hence many of their comments referring to say, please approve the rezoning. It's like we're not there yet. The rezoning would be another public hearing down the road if the code gets amended first to allow this new zone. So with that, I'll go on with my summary. The planning commissioners will recall that the applicant actually filed a somewhat similar request earlier this year, and that was for a code amendment simply to allow their RV lots to have permanent accessory structures. As was explained then, our RV zone was created many decades ago, and it was designed for what was then considered to be the traditional RV park that we all knew when we were kids and maybe camping and going around the country, where you rolled in for a week or two or a weekend and then you rolled on out and nobody owned a lot. It was your KOAs and your Jellystone parks and things like that around the country. And apparently the industry and that recreational industry has changed, and in addition to that traditional type of RV park, what's evolved over the last decade or two is something called an RV resort, and those often have RV lots that are individually owned, real property. The RVs are still vehicles. They can still move on and off the lot and are expected to do so. But per Boulder City's code, that expectation for actual moving is very low, so to speak, in terms of time, but I'll get to that shortly. In any case, the applicant's earlier request, in a sense, was the simpler request, just to allow them to have the permanent accessory buildings that they desired to have. The Planning Commission recommended approval of that request. However, when it went to City Council for their public hearing, they took no action. And you've got the minutes in your packet, so you can read into it, what you like, but at least a couple of the members of the council expressed comments that, gee, this particular park doesn't really fit the zoning that Boulder City has in place, so the zoning chapter for the RV zone. And it's true because, as I said, our chapter was created back in the 70s with the envision that all RV parks are the same and everybody's just going to be on a rented lot and, only there for a weekend or a week or two at a time. So why on earth would anybody need a permanent shed on the individual RV lots? And so some of the council members, in pointing out that Boulder Oaks doesn't fit that standard, it's true. And so the comment was made that perhaps the code needs to be considered changed. And actually, that's been the desire or the intent, or shall we say, the understanding of Boulder Oaks all along. We've dealt with various members of their different boards as they change and evolve over the years, and they've always had the attitude that they're not a standard RV park because they own their own lots. And they have their association which governs it rather than a park manager, etc. So actually, even though considering the first code amendment they attempted failed, this second attempt to try to address the issue is actually something they would prefer more because it acknowledges that they are a different park. And from that standpoint, staff agrees. Obviously, there is a difference between an RV park under a single owner where all the lots are rented and an RV park managed by an association where everybody owns their own lots. So that all being said, what this proposed text amendment does is the following. It would create these two subzones recognizing those two distinctions, RV park and RV estate. The RV park zone will be for the traditional parks on a single property with an on-site manager. And if this code amendment is approved by the City Council, the code is designed so that all of the existing parcels zoned RV would be designated RV park. And there's basically about 4 properties. 2 are vacant and owned by the city. 1 is this current park, Boulder Oaks, also known as Red Mountain RV Resort. And then the other one is Canyon Trail RV Park, which is the traditional RV park. Secondly, the new RVE, or estate zone, will be for the RV developments with individually owned lots. And in this case, that would be Boulder Oaks. And they've already filed for their rezoning request at the rezoning at the request of staff. But again, the rezoning will only be heard if the code amendment is approved first by the City Council. The proposed RVE zone language will technically allow for permanent will allow for permanent accessory buildings and structures on RV lots as proposed under their previous request and with the proposed changes the Planning Commission recommended back at that time. And as the stated intent of the RV zone is for long-term occupancy, the text change also eliminates the limitation on occupancy, which I'll explain in a little more detail in a moment. And other than that, no changes are otherwise proposed for the RV park zone. The only other aspects of the text changes are format related, so that, one is called a park and the, other is called the estates, and overall they're both developments. The city's RV zone was originally the travel trailer zone, established in 1970, and again, as stated, that was intended for the short-term occupancy of RVs, trailers, etc. And although the zone language prohibits permanent occupancy of RVs in the zone, for all practical purposes, the way Boulder City's code is currently written and has been for decades, it effectively allows an RV to occupy the property for most of the year anyway. And that's based on the language in the code that refers to continuous occupancy can't exceed 180 days. So the legal interpretation is that an RV can occupy a space 180 days, move out for a day, come back, and the new 180-day clock starts again. They could leave for a day, come back, and the new 180-day clock starts again. That effectively allows the same RV to occupy a lot 363 out of 365 days a year. So the language change in the code doesn't really have any impact. If for some reason it doesn't get changed, it's not going to change the current legal status. It's just simply a matter of if the code is going to be amended and you're going to state a different purpose for the RVE zone, then just clean up the language with regard to that. And given that this application is on behalf of Boulder Oaks, although it creates the two distinct subzones, the attached draft just provides for the accessory buildings and structures in the new RV estate zone. The prior version actually applied it to both zones, but since the applicant isn't representing the other park, this application would just allow the permanent accessory buildings in the RV estate zone if this is approved. The owner of the other park was notified, and we have not heard any comment back from him about this. The code amendment, if approved, and if the subsequent rezoning is approved, will not negate the need for the owners to obtain the required building permits for all the existing structures that have already been put up. The ordinance would just allow for those structures to be in compliance with code. And although the scope of this amendment request may seem more comprehensive in nature as compared to their prior request, in reality, the effect of the current amendment will still just simply allow for the types of accessory structures that owners have already been adding to their lots. The change regarding the occupancy language reflects the intent of the RV estate zone for long-term occupancy, but the practical effect is negligible, given that RVs can effectively occupy a lot nearly year-round now. And then the proposed changes acknowledge the few but pertinent differences between the two types of RV developments, while still requiring the same standards for construction and city approval. If you read all the backup, you'll note that one of the owners who submitted an email questioned about, well, are we going to have to increase the number of toilets in our park or change the roads in the development? And it's like, no, the project was approved per code, and actually there was a variance approved for various things back when it was developed, but that means it complies as that was approved. So none of that will change. You also saw in one of the email backup that changing the zoning district is not going to affect anybody's taxes. Whether or not the assessor will drive through the park and start assessing people on their buildings is up to them. But yes, as the structures, if they're permanently attached to the ground, that's considered something taxable by the county assessor. But that's only going to affect the people who actually have those on their lots. It will have zero impact on all the lot owners who don't have an accessory building on their lot. So that, again, effect is just on a lot by, each lot basis, depending on who chooses to have an accessory building. So the report concludes that the commission has two options for consideration of the request. If you're in support, you would vote to adopt the resolution, which is a recommendation to council. And if you're not supportive, you would want to make a motion recommending denial and provide whatever findings you believe are appropriate. And I'll just mention that, again, although the city clerk read the public comments that were submitted to their office, the remainder of the report includes additional email correspondence that was submitted to the Community Development Department, as well as a petition submitted by the applicant with signatures of over 100 lot owners in support of the request.
Very good. Thank you, Susan. Any questions for staff at this point? Mr. Laszlo.
It is Lassoff for the
Thank
record.
you, sorry.
No worries. Susan, when trying to figure out how exactly to word this, I know we got a potential conflicting issue with what I'm about to say. In our mobile home park and mobile home estate, that's Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, we've totally differentiated between the two different types of property, where one is owned by one person, another one is owned by individual lots. Was there any consideration on doing this redrafted amendment of creating an entirely new chapter to make this even more confusing?
May I answer that first?
Yes.
We briefly considered it, but we just realized there was not much point in repeating all that information. I understand sometimes a redlined version of a document might look confusing to read, but it's 90% of the information is the same, other than, for the most part, most of the changes are actually changing the word, park to development, so that the two can be distinguished. But for instance, if voters approve the sale of any other land for an RV park, the same development rules would apply, whether or not the lots are owned individually, or not.
Okay. I was also curious if that was one way we went down, if that would be considered spot zoning, as you've told me time and time again that it's illegal. Changing just one parcel, is that right?
That's a complex discussion, but the nature of this would not create a problem.
Okay.
I mean, there's a few cases where you can have, a single property zoned one thing. The nature of the evolution of this is not an issue. It's not like you'd be taking a single-family lot in the middle of a single-family subdivision and saying, I want to rezone this multiple family to put a different type of use there. All the more reason, actually, why having these two subzones within the same chapter, like we do our government zones, we have 5 government subzones all in the same chapter, is because technically, in terms of the zoning regulations, they're more alike than they are different. As I noted in the report, it's really a few but pertinent distinctions, but effectively, all this code amendment does is allow accessory buildings on the lots that are individually owned, and it tweaks the language for occupancy, but there's no, noticeable difference in the impact that that would have. It's just that those are pertinent differences so that, this park would be allowed to have the accessory buildings that many of the owners there apparently feel there is a need to have.
And that kind of brings me to my next question. Because we're tweaking the occupancy to allow them to basically live there permanently, which many people there are doing already, does that trigger any type of an allotment process? Or is it because they're not creating, and I think I already know the answer to this, and is it because we're not allowing them to create any livable space, then it wouldn't trigger an allotment process?
That's correct. The growth control ordinance is very clear that it applies to dwellings and hotels and motels. An RV under state or any law that I know of is not classified as a dwelling, and it's certainly not classified as a dwelling per the growth control ordinance.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for staff?
Yeah, and clarification, Susan. One of the concerns I heard raised was in reference to wooden structures and potential fire danger. Has our fire department looked at the code, and obviously have they said there is no issue?
To be honest, we didn't route this through the fire department. We can, and the reason I bring up that we didn't is because the standards for accessory buildings in that regard are no different than they are for a single family or any other zoning district. The building code does not require a building permit for structures under 120 square feet. So just as in your residential backyard, you can have a wooden shed right up next to a property line. The same would be true in the RV park. But that being said, RV lots are smaller. We will certainly, before this goes to the city council, run it by the fire department to see if they have any issues.
Good. I think that makes sense, only just to get a confirmation. The other question I sort of trying to understand, and you said it, these are very small lots, obviously, even below our standard, what you might call an R1 lot at 5,000 or slightly less. If these lots run about 1,500 square feet, and if we allow, I guess with the code, the way it's modified, we would allow 2 structures, each of 200 square feet. We would take up roughly 400 square feet of that. If there were hardscape patios or driveways, does that also count into lot coverage when you figure lot coverage?
For one, basically the answer to that is there is no lot coverage standard in the RV zone because, again, it was never anticipated there would be permanent structures on the lots. But as you'll see from the ordinance amendment that's in the code and per the Planning Commission's recommendation last time, and it also matches what the board wanted, if an owner is allowed by the board to have 2 structures on site, one of them has to be open. There cannot be 2 sheds on a site. At most, there would be
Right.
1 shed and 1 gazebo. And if you were comparing this to the single-family zones that do have a lot coverage standard, the lot coverage doesn't apply to open structures. So on all your single-family lots, if you're proposing a patio cover or a detached freestanding shade cover or gazebo, none of that counts towards lot coverage. So at most, if there were a lot coverage standard in this zone, it would only apply to one shed.
Well, the second piece of that, when I was looking and just trying to understand lot coverage, was also the issue of slide outs and awnings, which are attachments to the actual RV. Would those also count into what would be considered a square footage if we had a requirement on it?
No, because those slide outs are part of the vehicle. Vehicles don't count towards lot coverage.
Even under, but we're addressing a new, essentially sub-zone code. So I guess where I'm going with it, I'm trying to understand if we shouldn't have consideration for what would be considered lot coverage.
I guess I would ask what the purpose would be, because the only thing it would apply to would be a single shed. Because again, you cannot legally apply lot coverage to an RV or the slide out from the RV. It wouldn't be appropriate to apply it to a shade structure if that's not what you do in residential zones. And so since the most any one lot could have is up to one 200 square foot shed, what's the point of also stating a lot coverage requirement?
Okay.
It would just mean if you did pick some kind of number, and pretty much you can see from the map in the report, the lots are all pretty consistent in size. There might be, there's a few corner lots that might be bigger. The only difference you'd have by applying a lot coverage standard would be maybe not all lots can have 200 square feet. They, depending on what number you pick, maybe they could only have 160 or 180 square feet. It would just Okay.
It's a good explanation. I think my only question for asking it is density. I mean, we do have, as it was pointed out, a very concentrated small street area. Everything is very close together. Maybe related to that, another question would be, are normal setbacks that would occur between, let's say, unenclosed covers like gazebos, patio roofs, and the structure, those will all be similar to our current dwelling zone setback or clearance requirements?
I'm not sure.
So in other words, when you have an accessory structure, my understanding is you have to have it like 5 feet from a building. So in this case, I'm assuming that the accessory structure, 200 square foot or a gazebo, has to be detached from the RV by at least 5 feet, correct?
They're just like single-family zones. There's no minimum distance between structures unless the building code imposes one. In this case, there's not going to be a setback between a shed and an RV because an RV isn't a structure.
Yeah, but let's be you're right, but now we're getting the semantics. The reality is there is a setback a clearance requirement between an accessory structure and a dwelling. And I know it runs about 5 feet per code. So
actually, no, you can have accessory structures right next to a house under certain, various
under
different,
certain, if you had
various
all the walls and
circumstances.
stuff. But if you take a normal type, it's there is, and so. But you don't have that kind of code requirement called out here. That's all. I'm just trying to make sure that we are appropriately addressing what I'd consider and what people have raised, safety issues. That's all. Really comes down to.
Right. We did run this by the building official, and I guess one thing that I can mention is that, as I mentioned earlier, the building code does apply to structures over 120 square feet. So that means the various sheds in the development that are under 120 square feet, they can be right up next to the property lines. But those that are 121 to 200 square feet, they will need to get a permit per the building code, and those actually will require setbacks to property lines
Correct.
unless they meet a 1-hour fire rating on the side next to the property line. So hopefully that will provide at least some comfort that
But there is
the
one-
larger structures, there will be a setback requirement to property lines unless they provide the required fire rating.
But there is one point in what you said that I'm still somewhat concerned about, and that is clearances between the accessory structure and the RV. Even though, because it's not a normal considered dwelling, it sounds to me like you could still need a clause to perhaps make sure that a comparable clause is included.
Well, it'd be similar to saying, just, for sake of argument, I could see your point, but it'd be similar to saying that in a single-family zone, that you could not pull your car right up in front of your garage door, because you'd need a 5-foot setback between your car and the garage or the shed. If that seems to be a similar issue of how close can you have an RV, which is a vehicle, next to a shed? And we'll be certainly happy to run it by the building official, but.
With all due respect, apples and oranges, I don't get the car analogy.
So your opinion, well, I guess you're.
My opinion.
Yeah, and I understand. You're saying an RV is not a car, and that's true. But from the code standpoint, an RV is a vehicle.
But for this new zone, it's effectively a dwelling because it becomes a permanent residence under its definition. So if we don't consider it like a dwelling, we maybe are looking at it incorrectly.
Well, certainly the Planning Commission's welcome to make whatever recommendation to the council it likes. If you want the code to say that there needs to be a minimum setback between sheds and RVs, you can certainly make that as part of your recommendation to council, but you will need to specify a distance, and depending on what that is, it may create various practical difficulties on these various lots, and you may end up seeing a whole bunch of variance requests. I don't know if that would be the case or not, but it's something that
Okay.
would
I'm
have
not
to be
sure
considered.
it needs specific call out as much as it just needs perhaps reference to the existing dwelling code. That would be the only thought I would have that make it more simpler. Your codes cover it right now.
But the
for
codes
dwellings.
don't require a setback between houses and accessory buildings. Like, there's very few exceptions when it does. If you have window openings on both sides, then something has to be fire rated. But you can put a wooden shed, an inch next to your house if there's no windows or openings needed for fire exit purposes between those structures. So it's possible that if you say that there should be the same type of setback as if it were a dwelling, we can certainly run that by the building official. He may just end up having to say that there is no requirement.
I'll tell you what, I see your points. I think I've made mine. I think the fact that if you're going to run it at least by the fire department and your building code, just to look at what you finally have here, if it should make sense, then I'm sure you will address it.
We will.
Let me just follow up on Ernie's point. So as Ernie was talking and asking some questions, it was occurring to me that in the past, Susan, it seems like the fire department has had some fire access clearance requirements, but with your point that, a wood structure can be within inches of the home under most circumstances, it seems like that's not the case. Can you remind us just a little bit about kind of what I'm trying to remember, but it seems like we had a discussion years ago about access, and it might have been a gate. I'm trying to remember kind of the circumstances.
Right. What you're thinking of is the requirement relative to accessory buildings and side yards. The way our code is written, when I first came here many moons ago, accessory buildings were only allowed in rear yards. And for the most part, that's the biggest yard. That's usually where you can fit an accessory building of any size. However, there are some properties, and the larger you get, the more yard area you have. And some people have large enough side yards where they were starting to put sheds in their side yards. And so the code does require that if there's an enclosed structure in a side yard, that there be at least some type of 5-foot clear access. If it's a carport, it's already open for access. But if it's a shed, the fire department wanted 5-foot access, on at least one side of the property between the buildings. And again, we're going to run this by the fire department to see if they have any issues with regard to where the sheds would be located on the properties, and we'll run it by the building official as well to see if they have any concerns about the distance of sheds to RVs. And certainly if either the fire or building division recommends that there be a certain distance between sheds and RVs, we will make sure to put that in the language of the code going forward.
Thank you. I think that addresses my concern.
Hey, Susan, it's Steve on the phone. What is the definition of an open structure? Is it one-sided, two-sided, or could it be three-sided with just the front open, and that would categorize it as an open structure?
If what you're thinking of is a carport, and specifically a carport attached to a house, and years ago, our code required carports attached to a house to be open on 3 sides if they were encroaching into a required setback. And that was changed many years ago to require that attached carports be completely open at the front and rear. They can have gates, but that's what the requirement is now in terms of an open structure. But again, in this case, and per, I believe, the language the commission added to the code last time, there can be no permanent structures attached to a vehicle. So there's not going to be any attached, shade structures attached permanently to an RV. So in this case, what the park is talking about is just simply what it refers to the code as a pergola or a gazebo, which by nature is open on all 4 sides anyway. It's basically support structures and some type of a roof structure.
Well, yeah, that was my question. How large of a structure could you build as long as it was only 3-sided that would still designate it as an open structure?
Well, again, the code refers to sheds, which we expect to be fully enclosed, or, open pergolas and gazebos.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. One of the points I think we needed to consider, some of the valid points you were making related to fire hazard. I think if we go too far down that road in this coding, then we're going to be forced at some point to look at the single residencies with folks pulling their campers in up next to their sheds. There's really, if you take your camper and you back it up into the side of your house and it's a foot from your shed to get it to fix, just because it's a different zoning, you're going to probably create a situation where we end up having to look at both. Just no criticism on what you were saying, but just the thought that if we went that route, there was probably something else we'd have to consider, or may have impact elsewhere too.
The only real issue is fire department and city code needs to look at it, period.
Any other comments? Teresa.
Thank you. Susan, I'm going under the assumption that a lot of these secondary structures already exist and haven't been inspected because there's no code currently to inspect them with. So if this is approved, does that mean that the structures that already exist will be retroactively inspected to make sure that they're safe and secure?
That would be yes. If the code amendment is approved and then the subsequent rezoning is approved, we will make sure to send out notifications to the board and all the lot owners that any structure over 120 square feet in size requires a permit. Also, the board's information to their residents, which triggered all of this, also said, you could have plumbing or electric. Those also trigger permits even if the structure is less than 120 square feet. So yes, if this is all approved and the rezoning approved, we will send out notifications informing people of the need for inspections, and we can have code enforcement, go through the park and, start sending out specific notices if we, don't start getting the applications. But we're also going to expect the board to cooperate, and remind their lot owners to be moving forward as well. But yes, that would be the plan, is that permits would be needed, there would be inspections. If there are structures that, are over 120 square feet and don't have the required 5-foot setback to a property line, they'll need to put up a 1-hour fire rating on that side of the structure. So yes, the city will be able to move forward with all of those inspections should this be approved.
And then conversely, if it's not approved, we have no real mechanism to make sure that the existing structures are safe.
Well,
And I would assume that the owners of the properties would continue to just build as they see fit.
well, technically no, because if this is not approved, those structures are not allowed by code. We're aware of them now and how many there are, so we would, the obligation would be to follow up with code enforcement against all of those structures, if this is not approved. Hence why the board is, taking all the required measures to see that this could be approved.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of staff? Nate.
Susan, on hearing Commissioner DeTeresa's comments, it triggered another question that I originally had but forgot to write down. As I was reading through the packet, there's a number of people in here that have made comments about the utility capacity or the potential for an increase in their in what they're going to demand for utilities, such as electric or what have you. Have we checked with Public Works? I think one person said that when the building or when the community was developed, it wasn't intended to have permanent structures, so it might not have the capacity to add lights on a pergola or what have you.
We can definitely find out through either the building official or Public Works what the typical, say, electrical load would be for adding your standard improvements, say, to a shed. It's usually lighting. I believe the board had already said they're not going to allow people to put bathrooms or anything like that in the sheds. Those type of increases are usually pretty minor from an electrical standpoint, and I believe actually, even though none of the existing sheds got zoning approval, what we found out after the fact is owners who had already put in their sheds, and as I said, the city has actually mailed out public information in the past that says, hey, if your shed's under 120 square feet, you don't need a permit. It probably didn't mention that, oh, by the way, these aren't allowed in the RV zone, but people might have in good faith simply put up small sheds. And then when they wanted electric, some of them came to the city saying, okay, I want to put electric in my shed now, and those permits were issued. Unbeknownst to me, and we've since rectified that issue. So I believe at most what happens is they might have to do a minor increase to their electrical hookups, and there are fees associated with that, but we will certainly check with Public Works to find out if there are any greater impacts and any capacity issues with regard to city services. We haven't heard any negative impact from them at this point, but we can definitely ask that question.
Okay, thanks.
If we're actually talking about some of the text wording here, is that a good time to talk about it now? There is one other area that I have a question and actually kind of a concern. In the paragraph B, item 2 under the RVE zone, where it just says.
Can you be more specific? What paragraph B?
Okay,
What?
I'll go back. 1182, item B, item 2, which it says RVE, ... The last sentence says, the allowance of long-term occupancy does not prohibit the rental of individual lots for short-term purposes by the owner. Now, what I'm concerned about is we are now setting this up as what I call technically a full-time residential type of unit, okay? Even though it's RVs. The point is they're owned. People that own them are basically going to have their RVs there. They could also, on a long-term basis, perhaps rent it out, lease it out to someone else. But the language of short-term gets into something our current codes do not cover, and that has to do with short-term rentals, daily, weekly, as Airbnbs and VRBOs would do. And I'm concerned that we set a precedence by putting the language in here, short-term rental. Since it is not an RV park, we clearly have RV park as short-term rental. But once you open up this estate one, which becomes like permanent dwellings, if we have short-term in there, we open up the whole issue of essentially owners taking advantage of VRBOs and Airbnbs. And right now, with the way the code is set, the city attorney has always spoken on this to me, it's up to the HOAs to regulate it, which is fine. It's a perfectly sensible thing for the HOA to do. But I don't think the city at this point wants to get into that, because you do, I think, set a precedence with that language.
Well, we will certainly get the city attorney's opinion before moving forward, but I think from the city standpoint, RVs are still not the same as dwellings, and the fact that these are vehicles on wheels means vehicles will still be moving. Just because somebody may be able to occupy it full-time year-round, I'm sure the board will probably mention that there are numerous residents who do leave town, sometime for months at a time. And I know for a fact from seeing the property owner listings that many of the owners live out of state, so they may be your classic snowbirds who might come here for half a year. And if they choose, as they do now, to rent out their lot the other 6 months of the year.
But that's long-term. There's an issue between daily, weekly, or let's say under a month. And that's the issue I'm bringing up.
Well, the Boulder City Code at this time does
not regulate it.
It does not regulate daily, weekly, monthly, et cetera.
I know.
Basically, again, the city's standpoint is that these are still vehicles. If somebody chooses to own a lot and they just want to rent it out as a standard RV rental lot and suppose they never bring their RV to town, they just bought a lot in this park and they choose to rent it out and a different RV comes every week, that's actually what the city designed the RV zone for. The city has from the staff's perspective, we have no interest in prohibiting that, and no, we don't see that as the same or as setting a precedent for just because an RV in an estate zone the owner can still rent out its lot, say on a weekly
But
basis.
Susan,
That
pause.
doesn't relate to single-family zoning and what you can do with a home.
But
But
pause.
we will
for a moment.
certainly, get an opinion from the city attorney regarding that.
Well, I think you need that, but just in summary, what you're arguing, the fact is, all you're doing is going back to the RV park zone, which is really what we're subdividing. We have RV park, it is for short-term rental, and we are now creating a permanent type of RV zone, which has similar characteristics to permanent dwellings. Similar is the operative word.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Michael Mays, Community Development Director. I guess in looking at that sentence, if it was removed, I don't know if that would preclude the flexibility that the park owners would have, and at the same time could address your concern regarding the interpretation of short-term rentals.
Actually, Michael, I like that because what it really does, it allows the HOA to define the rental period, which is perfectly, I think, what it should be. And keep the city out of trying to define it, which most cities within the country right now are still struggling over that very issue.
Thank you, Michael. What I might suggest is as we go towards working through the individual language of this text amendment, perhaps we hold that until after the public hearing, and before we've made a motion.
Also, you want to hear from the applicant first and
Correct.
have the opportunity to ask them questions.
Correct, thank you. So at this moment, any further questions of staff? Hearing none, is the applicant available and willing to speak with us?
Hi, is this Nancy Hoffman?
Yes, it is. Let me turn this down.
All right, and during the time that you're not speaking, you'll probably want to mute your phone on your end.
I would.
All right, but
Okay.
I'll let the chairman talk to you now.
Oh, okay. I was beginning to wonder if they were going to call me. Okay.
Hello, Mrs. Hoffman.
Hello. Hang on a second. Hang on. Well, maybe I might be able to hear you better. I could barely hear you a while ago.
All
Are you
right.
there?
Oh, you bet. Can you hear me now?
Fairly well, yes.
I've got one of those hard to hear voices, it turns out.
Okay.
Unless it's my son. Anyway, thank you for your patience this evening. I don't know whether or not you've had been able to listen to the live stream of the meeting and have overheard any of the questions that were posed by commissioners.
Yes, I've been listening, definitely, and hopefully I'd like to kind of maybe allay some of the fears and some of the comments that have been brought up. I don't know. I just feel like I have a little bit more to add to that. First of all, I know about the fire issue, and I don't know if you really think about that. The fact that the wood structures are a fire hazard. Well, anything you're around is a fire hazard, basically. But to top it off, I think it's kind of ironic because all of us that live in these RVs, you're sitting there driving around all over the country with a propane tank in your vehicle. And talk about a fire if you, have an accident. You're right there. But the bottom line is, talking about these things, right now there are several that have resin sheds on our lots or the vinyl sheds. And in doing some research regarding this, The resin sheds or vinyl sheds are actually more hazardous than a wood shed because they will catch on fire as well. And what makes it worse is the fumes from those sheds are very toxic as well. So that's not a good thing to have either. But the bottom line is you can have a fire in anything. And like I say, we've had vinyl sheds. I haven't seen them, I'll put it that way, in this park that have caught on fire. And it just matters, you know, I'm sure you realize, you know, if you've got an ignitable source of some sort, that can create a fire. I don't care whether it's a wood structure, vinyl structure, metal structure, it can do that. So, you know, I understand the comments, but basically to hang our hat that you can't have wood structures because they might cause a fire. Well, like I say, anything you have can cause a fire. But I just wanted to toss that out there. Something was said, too, about, you know, we mentioned about mobile home parks, too, which are similar to an RV, obviously. And I know I've driven around in some of the mobile home parks in the community here, and you have sheds that are sitting almost on top of the mobile homes. They're wooden sheds, there's lattice work, there's all kinds of things that the city allows in those kinds of developments. I guess I get confused by all the, you know, comments regarding fire being such a hazard in this particular place. And again, the mobile home parks I've been in, their lots aren't really much bigger than what we've got here when you really take a look at them. But that's my thoughts on it. And the other thing I know about talking about structures getting too close to the RVs, well, we're not allowing anybody to get the structure so close that that RV cannot be pulled in and out of the lot. That's still something that we're requiring, and we require setbacks far enough that people can park in front of their RV and still have, or in front of their gazebo or pergola or whatever they might have. Structures like sheds are to go at the back of the lot. They're not up front in any way. And so the room and setbacks and all of that, our HOA requires setbacks just like the city does. So we have an architectural and landscaping committee through the HOA, and they are made up of people that do have construction-related type backgrounds. And they go in and they take a look at the property and do an assessment themselves and approve everything before it goes up. So people aren't just allowed to put up anything they want to. We do inform them that they do need to follow the city's requirements, that's for sure. Oh, back to the fire issue, too. There is one other thing I wanted to comment on. I don't know if you're familiar with the Las Vegas Motor Coach Resort. That's a very, very fine resort in Las Vegas where property values, you know, the lots run for $120,000 on up. Well, what's interesting, back to the fire issue, is that in that resort, they're allowed to have palapas, and I don't know if you're familiar with those or not, but they're open-sided structures that come with a thatched roof made of dried palm fronds or leaves. I know when I first went into that resort and looked at it, talk about thinking about a fire hazard, I asked the people that were, the lady that was taking us around showing us the property, I said, do you have any issues with those, with fires? And she said, nope, not a problem at all. And further note, many of the palapas are placed over outdoor cooking areas, which include like a propane barbecue grill, and other areas, and they're there over their kitchens to provide shade and everything else. So I thought that was really interesting that they do allow those in the Las Vegas Motor Coach Resort. Just a couple of other things that I wanted to mention. Oh, too, talking about the size of our lots. By the way, they run anywhere from 2,500 square feet. And some of them are a little bigger than that. So, yeah, they're not real big, but they're not as small as you might think they might be, to be honest with you. We have talked about it, and I know from some of the comments that I hear from people that had sent information in, not from the Planning Commission, but from those that had sent some information in regarding it. There's a lot of confusion there, and I've tried to allay get away from that, letting owners know that what the city council and what the planning commission do have no effect on our governing documents, our CC&Rs and everything else. And so like I say, I've done a lot of talking to people, but we still have a few, and I know that was mentioned in one of the opening comments. But the majority of our members do definitely understand that what is happening with the city does not affect our governing documents, and our governing documents are something totally different that need to be handled in a different venue. But I just wanted to toss that out, because you can see from the packet of information you've got, we had 118 signatures on a petition. We went around and trying to eliminate some of the misconceptions and misinformation that was floating around by just a handful of people, I must say. Started talking, we talked about it at a board meeting, we went through it all very carefully, explaining, the process. And again, like Susan said, it's confusing being a two-part process in so many words, doing the text amendment first and then another one for actual rezoning. But it was good because several of the owners in here worked very hard talking to other members, letting them know what was going on and explaining how it worked. And from that, from the ones that were here, we sent out some emails to some, but we didn't have near everybody email access or even a phone number to give them a call. But of those we approached, they're very, very elated about the prospect of becoming an RV estate, and they see no negatives whatsoever in this text amendment and moving forward. So I'm really thrilled to say that we have so many that are for it. So we really appreciate the Planning Commission looking at it and considering. And I will let you know, too, this is done, I came from Florida approximately 4 years ago. And we had lived in an RV resort, and we were allowed to do these structures on them. And again, the lots back there were about the same size as they are here. And we were able, and it made a very, very nice community by doing that. And so we feel like Boulder City will be one of about only 4 communities in the state of Nevada that offers such RV estate as this, where owners do get to do things to their property, and they really make a big improvement. And like I say, that Las Vegas Motor Coach Resort is a fine example of what this place could actually turn into if we keep working with it. So, about the electrical too, I'll throw this out. I know Susan's going to do some research on it, but I have run this past. We've done a lot of research on this. We're just not throwing it out here without doing our homework first. And the electrical issue, I have talked to our electrician who has been with this park ever since it was started back in the mid-90s. He knows it very, very well, inside and out, and he's the guy we call the minute we have an issue electrical. And I've asked him, do you see any issues with what we're planning? And he said, no, there shouldn't be any issues at all. This should be able to hold it. Again, back to the sheds and pergolas, gazebos, they don't take a lot of electricity. It's not as if you're putting a whole house in here with a lot of lights and equipment and things that you're running. So just basic lights, a few things like that. So it doesn't overtax our electrical system that much. But anyhow, like I say, I do really appreciate your considering this, and hopefully you will recommend approval for it and we can move forward, because I know a lot of owners really are depending on it. So thank you. Do you have questions for me?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hoffman. Any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Biaski.
This is, Ms. Biaski. Question for you is, in your CC&Rs, if you have to make a change, what percentage of the residents, of the lot owners have to approve it?
67%, so it's out of 277, it's like 180, something like that, so.
So in other words, the 108, when you solicited the 118, if I recall what you said, you did not do a full membership solicitation?
That's correct. No, we could have, if But, it's this time of year, in the summertime, you have a lot that are gone, and with the people, and we just went around basically and talked to people here. We could have, if we really had all the connections and all, if it had been more in the wintertime when most everybody is here, it would have been a little easier. But like Susan said, we have people or owners that, live far out of state and they don't come here very often, and they travel when they're not here, so they're not always easy to track down if you want to. So we just took a sampling of what we could find, and like I say, we got an overwhelming response from that. And so the members are very much in favor of doing this.
I might question that, but thank you for your answer.
Any other questions for the applicant? Ms. Hoffman, this is Mr. Matuska. I think my only question is, you'd indicated with regard to the electrical system that you've looked into it, and the folks there, I'll say on site, felt that it was adequate for the load that might be imposed by future sheds and pergolas. If it does need to be upgraded, I'm assuming that would that cost be borne by the park and the homeowners, or does that somehow fall on the city?
No, it wouldn't fall on the city at all. If an owner does not have enough electrical power coming into their lot, it would be up to them to pay to have the extra added.
Okay, very good. And that finishes my questions. Looking around at the commissioner, anyone else? Very good. Well, thank you for your time here this evening. And we'll be opening it to public hearing in just a moment, and you may want to stick around.
No,
Oh, whoops. We will be opening it for public hearing, and I understand that that will take the phone line. So we appreciate your time, and and take care, and we'll talk some other time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate what you're doing.
And Nancy, just obviously you'll keep watching, and if after the public hearing any of the commissioners have questions of you, we'll just give you a call back.
Okay, that sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Susan. That would be appreciated. So this is a public hearing. Anyone in the public wishing to be heard on this matter can place a call now to 702-589-9629. Again, 702-589-9629. And we'll pause for a minute waiting for calls. About a minute and 15 seconds. Should that be adequate to give some indication?
You could request one more time and provide the phone number.
So far, we have no comments, but let me repeat, whoops. There we go.
Planning Commission meeting, public comments.
Hi there. Yes, my name is Tony, and I just wanted to be quick and say I'm in agreement with what's being proposed by our committee, our HOA, or our board members, I should say. I don't see any problem with it at all, and I'm looking forward to this getting approved.
Tony, can I get your last name for the record, please?
Sure. Hi, yes, it's Tony Llewellyn.
Can you spell that for me, please?
Sure. Lewallen.
Thank you.
Was that it?
Yes, thank you for calling in.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And I would remind the viewing audience that if they have if they have comments to this particular agenda item, the call-in number is 702-589-9629. And please call in now. I think it's fair to say we've received no additional comments. So I would declare the public comment period closed and move this back to the commission. If I could, maybe I'd suggest that we discuss the matter before we go into making comments to the red line. In other words, the point is, if you all are not in favor of this, there's no point in going through the text amendment individually, or I mean line by line. So perhaps I could just start with my own.
Well, I'll start it since you're pausing. I support the zoning change. I think it makes perfectly good sense to cover what is a development that already is in place, and potentially we could have others. I think there are issues within it. I think many of those issues really should be resolved by the HOA properly, which they have not been done, I will say that. One clarification I'd like to make is she was totally wrong when she says the CC&Rs trump the city code, which it does not. It only goes so far as to make things tighter, but it doesn't make it, it cannot override it. My one issue, and I do contend when we get to the text, I do want to address that one sentence within that one paragraph having to do with short-term rental. I do believe that needs to be removed. Otherwise, it sounds like with the fire department looking at it, building code looking at it, some of the issues that have been raised and whatever that I think are safety related would be covered, my opinion.
Thank you. I would just also lend my voice that I support this resolution, and would look forward to going through the text. We're doing kind
I'm
of a
in
straw
agreement.
poll,
We need
okay,
to-
Nate?
I'm in agreement. We need to move forward and go through the text.
I'm also in agreement.
Okay, very good. So it looks like we all agree that we should support this. Why don't we go ahead and, well, let's see. Just as a matter of proper protocol, should we get a motion and a second now and then go for text changes, or text first?
I would say text first so that we don't have to deal with too many amendments to motions. I guess one comment I'll make up front, just because we may need to take a brief recess, but if the commission is in favor of Mr. Biasi's proposal to eliminate the sentence that recognizes that short-term occupancy, short-term rentals are not prohibited in the RVE zone, I'm personally not so sure that simply eliminating that sentence is a simple matter. We may need a 5-minute recess so I could discuss that with the director, because to me, the legal implications are unclear unless you actually want to define a length of time for short versus long-term occupancy, because otherwise what the code language legally allows is occupancy of up to 180 days at a time, which, given how that's interpreted, could be 363 days in a year. It could be argued that that effectively is short-term occupancy based on how the code is currently written. So if you're wanting to eliminate the sentence, I think it puts the onus then to actually define short versus long-term occupancy. It isn't necessary the way the language is written now, because that sentence was put in there just so that owners would still be able to rent out their lots if they weren't there for however long a period of time. Presumably it is up to the HOA, and you're welcome to call the applicant back to find out what rules they have regarding minimum or maximum stays, for people renting lots, from other owners. But I don't think it's just simply a matter of eliminating that sentence without needing further clarification in the code as to what your intent is regarding that. If the sole issue, let me finish. If the sole issue is simply you're concerned about setting a precedent with regard to single-family residential zones, we can get an opinion from the city attorney on that.
Well, isn't it kind of in the title, recreational vehicle estate? To me, it's still RV. Recreational vehicle, which means it can be short-term or long-term, or we'd have to come up with a whole new zoning acronym for it, correct?
Right, they're both still RV zones.
So this has kind of brought a question to my mind as well. I was a little bit surprised at that sentence, and so I would ask this. The way the rest of the text amendment is written, or let's say the code as amended is written, would it, as currently written, without this sentence in, would it prohibit rental of individual lots in the RVE zone? Short-term rental, would it prohibit that?
That might be one implication. I don't know for a fact, because, for instance, to compare with actual residential zones, the residential zones, whether it's single-family or multifamily, don't get into topics of long-term or short-term rentals. I mean, if you own a single-family home, you can rent it out, currently our code doesn't define short and long term, so that would be another issue that would have to be defined here if you're going to actually make distinctions beyond the ones that are already made in this code regarding the occupancy limitations.
Sorry, this is Steve again. Wouldn't we be changing the zoning as it is right now because it's already zoned recreational vehicle? We'd be changing it to basically to a community or a single family because it's already zoned as recreational, which in definition can be short term, just like the other parks up there. All we're doing, by doing that, we're going to completely change the whole definition of recreational vehicle at the beginning of it, whether it's a state or a park. It's still recreational, which would be short term.
So you're kind of going to my point, and maybe I'll word it a little differently. Even without this particular sentence there, isn't short-term rental kind of implicit in this zone, just by virtue of the fact that it's a recreational vehicle zone? You see, that's what I'm kind of getting at, and
Mr. Chairman, I know for a fact there's people that come to these RVs spots, they park for a weekend and they're gone. I mean, days. So to put a definition for short term, I would not be in favor of that.
No, nor I.
I wouldn't be in favor of removing that either.
Here's part of the problem when you leave it. First of all, there is no management of that park except for an HOA, which is not a real-time management company, that would be needed for an RV park, which is by definition short-term, daily, or whatever rental. If you start getting into, and so it already says in the immediate paragraph sentence prior, it's RVP for long, is not for long-term. So you've already defined what an RVP is, and the only difference is the RVE is for for single ownership. It has nothing to do with rental, period, or long-term or short-term. It's just single family. It's just a single ownership versus a multi-ownership under RVP with the ability. Because the other problem you really have is there's licensing that's involved, okay? Which I think that I don't want to get into that, but I think the RVP has some form of licensing because it is considered multi-use, where single family does not.
Well, Mr. Chairman, for the sake of discussion, I'm failing to see what Mr. Biasi is getting at as far as removing it. What's the goal that we're trying to achieve? Because right now I don't see an issue with the language.
I don't want to see short-term referenced because short-term does imply something less than long-term by definition. And short-term can then be anything you want it to be, which then gets into other issues.
I got that part, but where's the problem? Because I'm failing to see it. I'm trying to have a discussion. I just don't see what the problem is. You defined it, but where's the negative?
The negative has to do with how an owner chooses to then rent it out. Most people in single-family dwellings under R1 code and by city code have certain things they can do within their purview, okay? I'm not going to reiterate them, but I looked at them. I know they're there. Technically speaking, all the RBE to me is just another form of a single-family occupancy. So anything that's in the current city code, really, that applies to single-family occupancy ought to apply. So you don't need to say anything because as soon as you say something about short-term, you're now opening up what is a definition of it. And I don't think we want a definition.
May I?
And so Commissioner Bonaire.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can do a quick poll just to see if the majority is interested in removing or keeping that so that we can get on with the motion. If we only have, one or two folks that are adamant about removing it and the rest of us are not, then I think we can move forward. I think it's been debated. Unless somebody has more comments that can contribute to some kind of reasoning, because I get what everybody's saying, and I kind of feel like we're beating this over the head. You either want the sentence or you don't.
Fair enough. Let's handle this a little bit differently, though. Rather than a straw poll on that sentence, does anyone else, let's move beyond that sentence, does anyone else have any other comments to the language that's being proposed here? Rather than going line by line, let's just bring it back to you all, and if there are any other comments on these few pages, let's hit them now, and then let's go to a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm okay with it the way it's written.
I'm okay with the way it's written also.
I'm in favor of the way it's written too.
Very good.
Yeah, I reviewed it over the last few days, and I'm comfortable with it as written.
Okay. Ernie, any other comments? And I too am good with this as written. Before we get to a motion, I'm just going to make one last point on this subject, and that is, it seems to me that, as Susan said, as we all know, you have certain rights associated with the ownership of your property. And it seems that if we were to remove this sentence, we might be taking away a right that others might have. But that's all I'll say on that. Why don't we bring it forward for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 1195 with staff findings.
I'll second the motion.
So my understanding then is the motion is to approve the text amendment as written, correct?
Correct.
Very good. We have a second. Do we have any further comment on this? Hearing none, I'll bring it to the vote. All in favor of, let me just make sure I'm using the right language. All in favor of passing resolution 1195 as written, please so designate.
Aye.
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 All against, please designate.
Against.
And the motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, we will follow up with those questions to other staff as we previously discussed before moving this forward to the City Council.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is monthly progress reports on development allotments.
No comment.
And lastly, we have general public comment. All those wishing to be heard on the final public comment opportunity, please call 702-589-9629, and please call now. Hearing no comments, I would just like to say to each of the commissioners, thank you very much for your consideration and deliberations this evening and for your service to this community. I hereby close the Planning Commission meeting of August 19th, 2020.
Thank you, everybody.